I was standing beside my father's casket when I heard her voice. My Aunt Maureen leaned in, barely above a whisper, and said, "He died disappointed." She never became anything. She didn't think I heard her, but I did. And then Caleb, her son, my cousin, added with a smirk, "She was always the one who let him down." I didn't turn. I didn't flinch. I just stood there staring at the casket, holding my breath so I wouldn't cry in front of them. The room was filled with people dressed in black, all murmuring memories and condolences, but their voices faded behind the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. All I could think was, "You really said that? At his funeral? About me?" I was the only child he ever had, the only person he used to tell bedtime stories to, the girl who sat on the kitchen floor painting with cereal box lids while he drank his coffee and read the paper. And now I was reduced to a sentence, a failure in black heels. I almost walked out. I was already halfway there in my mind. But then the lawyer came over. Mr. Beecham, Dad's attorney, gently tapped my shoulder and looked at me like he was about to say something impossible. "Alara," he said, "there's something your father wanted you to have. He left very specific instructions." I didn't answer. I just stared at him, still trying to pretend those words from Maureen and Caleb hadn't stuck to my skin like oil. He didn't wait for my response. He held out a box, wooden, small, heavy, worn at the edges like it had been handled a lot over the years. I didn't know what to do, so I just took it. "He wanted you to open this," he said, "in front of everyone." My fingers froze on the lid. "In front of everyone?" I repeated. He nodded. "Exactly those words, everyone." And suddenly, the silence in the room shifted. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. People started paying attention. Aunt Maureen narrowed her eyes. Caleb tilted his head like he was about to laugh. I hadn't planned to say anything at the funeral. I didn't think anyone cared what I had to say. But now, all eyes were on me. I looked down at the box again. My name was carved on top carefully, like he'd taken his time with it. Alara Quinn. And for the first time since I'd stepped into that room, I felt something other than shame. I felt curious, angry, afraid, hopeful. What did he leave me? Why now? Why here? The box sat in my hands like a challenge. I could have walked away. I could have stuffed it in my purse and opened it alone in my apartment hours later. But I didn't, because deep down I wanted them to hear what he had to say. Every single one of them, especially the ones who thought they already knew how this story ended. So I stepped forward, box in hand, and said, "This is from my father." The night I got the call, I was on my couch with a half-eaten microwave meal and my sketchbook open on my lap. I hadn't drawn anything in 3 days. I just kept flipping the pages, looking at lines that felt lifeless, unfinished. I wasn't expecting the phone to ring, and when it did, I let it go to voicemail. When I finally played the message, Mr. Beecham's voice was calm and clipped. "Ilara, this is William Beecham. I'm sorry to inform you that your father, Thomas Quinn, passed away last night." No build-up, no warm-up, just like my dad would have done it. I sat there staring at the wall for a long time. I wasn't sure what I felt. I wasn't crying. I wasn't relieved. I just felt blank, like someone had turned off the sound in my chest. I didn't even call anyone. Who would I call? My mom died when I was 20. I wasn't close with anyone in the family, and Dad and I hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. The last thing he said to me was, "You're wasting your life." I had just told him I'd quit the marketing job he helped me get. He stared at me like I'd spit on the floor. I told him I wanted to go back to painting full-time, that I was thinking of showing again. His face shut down. He muttered, "You had potential once," and walked out of the room. We never talked again after that. Growing up, my dad was the kind of man people admired from a distance. He was an Army veteran, a high school coach, the guy who volunteered at community fundraisers and told kids to shake hands firmly and look people in the eye. In public, he was steady, proud, respected. At home, he was colder, not cruel, just unreachable. My mom, Clara, was the softness in our house. She kept things warm, made sure I had space to draw, cheered when I won school art competitions. She died of breast cancer when I was in college. After she was gone, everything with Dad got harder. He started to see everything I did as weakness. He hated that I didn't finish my MBA. He never understood why I turned down the corporate offer in New York or why I spent months selling portraits at local art fairs instead. Aunt Maureen, his older sister, never missed a chance to remind me that Caleb had a six-figure job, a fiancé, and a condo in the city. She called me the dreamer when she was feeling polite, and the disappointment when she wasn't. Caleb and I had never been close. He liked expensive watches and being the smartest person in the room. I was the cousin who couldn't keep a real job and wore paint-stained jeans to Thanksgiving dinner. He never said it out loud, but his silence always told me where I stood. After the call, I packed a small bag and drove 5 hours to get back to the town I swore I'd never return to. Every street corner held some version of my childhood: the diner where I used to meet my mom after school, the playground with the crooked slide I broke my arm on, the church where my parents renewed their vows before she got sick, and now, the funeral home. When I arrived, the air inside was thick with polished wood and artificial lilies. People I hadn't seen in a decade hugged me tightly and said things like, "He was so proud of you, and he talked about you all the time." I smiled and nodded, but I knew they were lying. My father didn't talk about me. Or if he did, it was only in terms of who I used to be: valedictorian, promising student, the girl who got accepted to 3 Ivy League schools, the one who chose art school instead. I kept to myself that day. I didn't speak during the service. I sat in the second row with my hands folded in my lap, trying to ignore the side glances from Maureen and Caleb. When the priest called Dad a man of strong convictions, I wanted to laugh. He was more iron than man sometimes. He loved with his actions, but never with his words. At least not to me. After the service, people gathered for the reception in the hall across the street. I stood by the coffee table, mostly alone, watching as people shared stories and memories like confetti. That's when Maureen leaned in, and Caleb delivered his little stab. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what I could say that would matter to them. But then the box came, and everything began to shift. That was the moment I realized the story they thought they knew about me was only half of the truth. The other half was inside that box, and I was finally ready to open it. When I stepped forward holding the box, the energy in the room shifted. Quiet spread like smoke, moving fast, curling around every head that turned toward me. People lowered their drinks. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Aunt Maureen's mouth pulled tight. Caleb folded his arms like he was settling in for a show he didn't believe in. I stood there with that box in my hands and felt everything I had been burying for years come rushing up into my chest. I remembered sitting at my 8th grade art show waiting for my dad to show up. I'd won first place for a watercolor of our backyard. He never came. The next morning, he asked if I'd finished my algebra homework. I remembered senior year, standing in the living room with a full scholarship to an art academy in Chicago. He didn't say congratulations. He asked why I was choosing starving over stability. Now I was standing in front of the same people who had watched my father praise Caleb's every move and looked at me like I was the family's open-ended question. I had grown used to being the unfinished sentence. Maureen didn't bother hiding her impatience. She crossed the room slowly, her heels clipping against the tile, and gave me a look I knew well. The one she wore when I walked into family dinners with chipped nail polish or mentioned another job I'd left. "Ilara," she said, "if this is private, maybe it should stay that way." I didn't answer. I wasn't doing this for her, or for the people pretending to care. I was doing it because for once, my father had chosen me for something, and whatever was in that box, I needed to know why. I stepped up to the long table near the front of the room. It was still covered in framed photos and memorial candles. I placed the box down beside a picture of Dad from his military days. His jaw square, his uniform crisp, his expression set in that permanent look of quiet control. I ran my fingers over the carved letters of my name one more time. Then I looked out at the room. "This box was left for me," I said, "by my father. He asked that I open it here, in front of all of you." Caleb let out a quiet breath like a laugh, then glanced sideways at his mother. Maureen didn't say a word, but her arms were tight across her chest, and her mouth had vanished into a thin line. She was daring me to say something foolish, to embarrass myself, to prove them right. I opened the box. Inside, there was a single-sealed envelope, a small photo album, and a flash drive. The envelope had one word on the front, written in my dad's steady block handwriting, "Ilara." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the letter. I expected it to be cold. A list of regrets, maybe, or instructions, or a final judgment. But the first line stopped me cold. I never knew how to talk to you. There it was. Honest, unpolished, not softened by ceremony. I kept reading. You reminded me too much of your mother. Brave in ways I wasn't. Emotional in ways I didn't understand. You saw beauty where I saw risk. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you harder. I realize now I was just pushing you away. My throat tightened. The room faded around me. I kept your art. All of it. Every sketch, every print, every handmade card you gave me. I filed them in a cabinet at the office. I told people they were done by a professional artist I was proud to know. I couldn't bring myself to admit you were mine. Not because I was ashamed. Because I didn't think I deserved to be your father if I couldn't support you the way you needed. I blinked hard, trying not to lose control of my voice. This isn't a goodbye, Alara. This is me. Finally saying the thing I should have said every single day. I see you. I've always seen you, and I'm proud. I finished reading and looked up. No one spoke. Not Maureen. Not Caleb. Not the neighbors who used to smile politely when my name came up with a sigh. The silence wasn't cruel anymore. It felt stunned. Like the story they had all agreed upon no longer made sense. Caleb shifted his weight and looked down at his shoes. Maureen didn't meet my eyes. Her arms slowly dropped to her sides. Mr. Beecham stepped forward. There's more, he said gently. The flash drive. He walked over to the laptop connected to the projector screen, inserted the flash drive, and clicked. Images filled the screen. Photos of my drawings, labeled and dated. Photos of me as a child with paint on my cheeks and markers in my hair. A short video clip of me presenting at my first gallery show. My dad's voice in the background could be heard saying, "That's my daughter." I hadn't known he was there. He had been watching, quietly gathering proof of who I was, even when he couldn't say it out loud. I thought he'd forgotten me, ignored me, but he hadn't. He'd been proud in silence. And now he was gone. But his voice, his true voice, was finally speaking. When the final image disappeared from the screen, the silence in the room stayed heavy. No one moved. No one made eye contact. For once, even Maureen had nothing to say. I stood there with the letter still in my hand, the weight of my father's words pressing into my skin like a brand. Every time he hadn't shown up, every time he had looked at me with disappointment, every phone call he didn't return, it all felt different now. Not erased, but rearranged. I had spent so long trying to earn his approval in the language he understood. Grades, jobs, degrees. I had let go of so much of myself just trying to meet a standard he never fully explained. Now I knew he had been watching me through a different lens all along. He had seen the parts of me I thought he refused to acknowledge. He had kept them, protected them, maybe even cherished them. I sat down slowly in the nearest chair, letter still open. I wasn't sure what to do next. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt raw, like I had been cracked open and asked to stand in front of a room full of people while they looked inside. Mr. Beecham approached again, voice quiet but purposeful. Your father updated his will a few months before he passed, he said. There's a section addressed specifically to you, and one more request. A murmur passed through the room, too soft to follow. I looked up, waiting. Maureen stiffened visibly. Caleb glanced at her, then back at me. Beauchamp opened a folder from his briefcase and read aloud. Thomas Quinn leaves his entire collection of personal artwork, photography, and creative memorabilia, including several pieces from local artists, student showcases, and unknown talents, to his daughter, Alara Quinn, with one condition, that she use them to open a local gallery or community art space in her name. I didn't understand at first. I looked at Mr. Beecham. A gallery, I said. He wanted me to open a gallery? He nodded. He believed this town needed a space to celebrate the kind of work you create, and that you were the only one who could bring it to life. The words hit me like a current. My heart jumped. My chest ached. I had imagined leaving this town behind forever. I had sworn never to return. But now, my father, silent, stubborn, practical to the bone, had asked me to stay. Not as an act of duty, but as a final expression of belief in who I really was. I looked across the room and saw Maureen's expression sour. She didn't speak, but her disapproval was sharp and visible. I wasn't supposed to win. Not this way. Not in front of everyone. Caleb's jaw tightened. I could see the question in his eyes. Why her? And for the first time in years, I didn't shrink from the weight of it. Because I knew the answer. I stood again. Steadier this time. I used to think that silence meant disapproval, I said to the room. That when my dad didn't show up or didn't say anything, it was because I had failed him. I paused, letting the words settle. But he was watching. He saved every piece of me I thought he threw away, and now he's asked me to do something with it, not to prove anything, but because he believed in what I could build. I looked directly at Maureen. You don't have to believe it. You never did. That doesn't make it any less true. Then I turned to Caleb. You don't have to like it either. I'm not who you are. I never was, but I don't have to be. Neither of them answered. They didn't need to. This wasn't about them anymore. I turned to Mr. Beecham. I'll do it, I said. I'll open the gallery. I didn't know how. I didn't know what it would cost or how long it would take, but I knew I would figure it out. Because this was the first time I wasn't chasing approval or escaping judgment. I was building something that came from me, and for once it would stand with my name on it. I left the funeral that day with the letter folded carefully in my bag and the flash drive in my pocket. The box stayed with me, a reminder that some stories don't end where they begin, that sometimes the things you believed were lost forever had simply been waiting to be handed back to you. A week after the funeral, I stood in my father's office for the first time in years. The door creaked when I opened it, like the room itself hadn't moved since he left it. The air smelled like old paper and cedar. His desk sat exactly how I remembered it. Immaculate, disciplined, not a single item out of place. But when I opened the side filing cabinet, everything changed. Inside were folders, dozens of them, labeled by year. The first one read, Ilara, age 6. I pulled it out, flipped it open, and there it was. My first crayon drawing of a dog with 5 legs and a sun that looked more like a lemon. Below it, a note in my father's handwriting. Said it's a superhero dog who protects art. Next folder. Ilara, age 9. A flyer from my 3rd grade art show taped to the inside cover, a newspaper clipping of the winners. My name circled. He had highlighted the sentence where the reporter mentioned a young girl with bold color instincts. My breath caught. I kept going. Age 12, 15, 18, my college portfolio, sketches I'd long forgotten, business cards from my first freelance show, even rejection letters, carefully preserved with his notes beside them. They'll regret this one. It wasn't just sentiment. It was proof. Proof that my father had been watching my life like it mattered. He hadn't just collected what I made. He had cataloged it, studied it, protected it. He had seen my work as something worth archiving, worth keeping safe. He never told me. Not once. I don't know if he thought it would soften me or distract me. Maybe he just didn't have the words. Maybe he believed he had to raise me to survive, not create. But in the end, this quiet room told me more about him than he ever did with his voice. He hadn't rejected who I was. He just didn't know how to celebrate it out loud. That moment broke something open in me. For years, I believed I was the daughter who failed, the one who left potential behind, the one who refused to follow the formula. But the truth was far more complicated. I hadn't let him down. I had simply taken a road he didn't know how to travel with me. Now he had given me the map. That same day, I drove to a small building near the town square. It used to be an old bakery. Boarded up windows, faded sign, a for lease notice curling behind glass. I stared at it from the sidewalk and could already see the future taking shape. White walls, hanging frames, wooden benches where kids could draw, a corner for community exhibits, a spotlight near the entrance for my mother's portrait, the one I painted from memory a year after she passed. I called the number on the sign that afternoon. 2 weeks later, the keys were mine. At first, I told no one. I spent quiet days sanding floors, cleaning windows, hauling in used furniture from estate sales. Some nights I cried alone on the paint-splattered floor, not from sadness, but from release. For the first time, I was building something without hiding it, without explaining it, without apologizing for it. Word started to spread. The town's newspaper reached out for an interview. They wanted to know why I came back, why I chose here. I said, because the story never really left me. People from the community began donating supplies. A former student of my dad's volunteered to help with lighting. My old art teacher sent boxes of unused canvas and oil sticks. Slowly, it began to feel real. Then opening day arrived. The front door creaked open, just like his office had. I stood inside wearing jeans and a paint-streaked button-down shirt, shaking hands, thanking strangers, answering questions about the exhibits. At one point, I noticed Caleb walk in, alone, no Maureen. He didn't say much. He walked the room, looked at each piece. When he reached the far wall, he stopped at the display titled, "What He Saved." It was filled with drawings from my childhood, mounted behind glass, each with a typed caption, my father's notes, his handwriting scanned, printed, and preserved. Caleb stared for a long time. Then he turned, walked back to me, and said, "I didn't know about any of this." I nodded. Neither did I. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He left without another word. I didn't need an apology. I had the truth now. The gallery stayed open late that night. A little girl came in with her mother and stared at one of my newer paintings, bright reds and purples in thick strokes. "Did you make this?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes." "Can I paint like this someday too?" I crouched down, looked her right in the eyes, and said, "You already can." She smiled like someone had just handed her the world. That night, as I locked up and stood alone in the quiet space, I realized what the box truly was. It wasn't a secret. It was a seed. My father left me something to grow. 6 months after opening, the gallery was no longer quiet. Kids laughed during Saturday art workshops. Retired teachers stopped in to donate supplies. High school students submitted their first works for public viewing. Parents came after work to take in a moment of color before heading home. There were conversations happening every day about creativity, about identity, about what it meant to be seen. I named the space Quinn House, not for myself, but for both of them. My father, who built the structure I fought against, and my mother, whose softness shaped the space I now lived in. The old bakery had become something new, something living. The walls pulsed with energy. The air carried the smell of oil paints and fresh coffee from the cafe next door. It didn't just look different. It felt like a place where stories could change. People started asking me if I ever thought I'd come back. I told them no, because I didn't. I had spent most of my adult life trying to outrun this town. I believed it had decided who I was a long time ago. But what I didn't understand back then was that stories are allowed to evolve. Identities are allowed to be rewritten, even legacies. Sometimes people don't know how to love you the way you need. My father was one of those people. But that doesn't mean he didn't love me at all. It doesn't mean he wasn't trying. He just never learned how to say it until he found a different way. I used to think the silence between us was proof that I had failed him. Now I see it differently. It wasn't silence. It was him gathering the right words, the right gesture, the right moment. That box wasn't just a surprise. It was his way of finally speaking a language I could hear. I kept the letter framed in my office. It hangs beside one of the first pieces I ever sold, a painting of the sky after rain. My dad's handwriting, captured forever, reads, "I see you. I've always seen you." That sentence changed everything. Not just for me, but for how I remember him. I no longer think of the last conversation we had as our ending. I think of the letter as the bridge, the one that connected the version of him I knew with the one I never got to meet until it was too late. Aunt Maureen never came to the gallery. Caleb visited once more, quietly dropping off a small donation in my name. We didn't talk that time either. He just nodded, and I nodded back. That was enough. I didn't build the space to prove anyone wrong. I built it to show myself what was possible when I stopped waiting for permission. I had waited for too long, for validation, praise, for someone to finally say I mattered. But that moment never really comes the way you expect. Sometimes it comes in a sealed box, handed to you by someone who never said the words out loud but meant them all along. Sometimes it comes when you decide to stop hiding and start building. I've learned that grief doesn't end when someone is buried. Sometimes it starts when the silence lifts, when the truth finally steps into the light, when the things you thought were broken reveal themselves as unfinished. My father didn't get to see this place filled with people. He didn't get to see what I became once I stopped trying to be who he wanted. But in his own quiet way, he helped build it. He laid the foundation. He gave me the last piece I didn't know I needed. Now I wake up every day surrounded by what he saved, not just the drawings or the letters, but the love buried inside them, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, it stays. If you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or dismissed, know this: you are allowed to become more than what they said you were. You are allowed to become someone they never imagined, not for them, for you. I used to think I let my father down, but I was wrong. He saw me. And in the end, he gave me the space to become everything I already was. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you've lost or a version of yourself you're still becoming, please take a moment to like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And if you have a story of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I share true stories like this because they help us feel a little more seen. If you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for being here. Really.